like a tax on securities derivative speculation. But if we make this an issue, there will be polls. And if the press will get away from their covering tactics and tones of voice and slurs and gaffes between the major candidates, just political gossip. What a waste of time. What is Hillary's strategy for Pennsylvania? What is Barack's strategy for Pennsylvania? Doesn't really come to grips with the problems affecting Pennsylvania, except on a very general level, like they'll improve the economy. But they've always said that. We want volunteers, we want people on our email list. We want them to help us collect signatures here in Pennsylvania, which is one of the most difficult states to get on the ballot. We would like people to contribute. We don't take commercial money or PAC money. Your dollars, small, middling, or large, the maximum contribution under law for the primary committee period until Labor Day is $2,300. And we've received contributions of $5 or even $1 from a retired miner in Southern Illinois. That's all he said he had. I wanted to frame the letter. That's what we're trying to do. For those who say, be practical, the only choice we have is least worst. Yeah, we're critical of the Democratic Party, but do you know how bad the Republicans are? Huh? That's exactly what the Democratic Party wants you to say. Because then, two things will happen. You won't make demands on them as a condition of your vote, because the Republicans are so much worse, in your view. They're pretty bad. And then they'll take your vote for granted. In 2004, the bulk of the anti-Iraq war movement called off their demonstrations. They didn't want to put that kind of pressure on John Kerry. And what did he do? He out-hawked Bush on the first debate, according to the Wall Street Journal's applauding editorial, saying, we wouldn't have pulled out of Fallujah. 2 months later, knowing the Democrats weren't going to object in the Congress, Bush went in and blew apart Fallujah in ways that were truly criminal against civilians. So you can go through each 4-year cycle and say, one thing is certain, forever, one party will be less worse than another. But why don't we measure these parties by a higher standard of voter expectation? And if we do, we become more in charge. We don't release them from our reins. The worst thing we can do with politicians is judge them on one issue that is burning to the voter. They can handle that. They're either for it or against it. When you judge them and you make sure it's communicated on 10, 15 issues that affect your view of the country and your daily lives, then the power shifts to the voter. The ability of these politicians to manipulate is significantly diminished because they have to take stands on many issues that the voters have taken the time to be informed about. And can voters be voters if they don't do their homework? If they don't analyze the record of politicians? They will be vulnerable to the rhetoric. And politicians are very good at rhetoric. And they're very good at flattering voters and flummoxing voters. And the more they flatter them, and the more voters allow themselves to be flattered, the more voters will be fooled because they've let their guard down because of the flattery. I think it's time for Republican and Democrat voters to stop knee-jerking their vote just because their grandparents voted Democrats or Republicans. In a telephone conversation I had with Mayor Bloomberg just hours before he put out a statement that he wasn't going to run. He didn't tell me that at the time. He said, I said, you know, there's a lot of support for independent candidate. And you know, when you're a billionaire, you don't have to worry about ballot access costs. And he said, I know. He said, I've done polls all over the country pursuant to the decision he was about to make, which is not to run. And then he said something amazing. I mean, he's a very candid person, but this one raised my eyebrow. He said, based on his survey of the voter, 15% of the Republicans would vote for the Republican nominee if the Republican nominee was Trotsky. And he said 15% of the Democrats would vote for the Democrat nominee if the nominee was Ayn Rand. We have to start doing our homework and thinking for ourselves. No matter who you vote for, you'll vote for a better choice when you think for yourself, because you'll demand more choices on the ballot. And I'll not only favor more third-party and independent candidates, including those who vigorously disagree with the Nader Gonzalez agenda. That's when you show you really believe in the First Amendment. And the First Amendment is a consummate amendment run you for political office, elective office. It's speech, petition, assembly, all wrapped up. So when they keep candidates off the ballot with all these difficult obstructions and costly harassment, they are obstructing candidates from expressing their First Amendment right to run for elective office. And without candidate rights to give you a greater choice, how much are your voter rights worth? How much are your voter rights worth when you only have a one-party district, Republican or Democrat, and the victor is already chosen in a kind of coronation, named the incumbent? So those of you who are concerned about voter rights must be concerned about candidate rights. You remember during the Soviet Union days when they'd have elections and they would announce that 97% of the voters in the Soviet Union voted? They would triumphantly announce that. And we would all laugh. Why would we laugh? Because there was only one candidate on each line, the Communist Party candidate. Let's look at ourselves in the mirror here. Whenever I hear this least worst argument, I say to the least worst arguer, what are you getting for your least worst vote? I said, aren't you glad that in the 19th century a few voters decided they weren't going to go for the least worst choice on slavery between the Whigs and the Democrats, and they voted for the Liberty Anti-Slavery Party? Aren't you glad? I haven't had anybody say no. And aren't you glad that a few voters voted for the Women's Right to Vote Party instead of trying to figure out which party was least worst on the women's right to vote? Here we are being taught in American history books we're a democracy, and African Americans in the 19th century and women didn't vote, couldn't vote. And they would say, yeah, we are glad. And aren't you glad that there were enough voters who voted for the Farmers Populist Party, the Labor Party, the Greenback Party, all those little parties that pioneered the social justice movements first, that we now take for granted and put the heat on one or two of the major parties to adopt them? Social Security, Medicare, progressive taxation, electoral reforms, the 40-hour week, worker rights to form labor unions.